At my graduation party, Dad said, "You didn't deserve this success. Your sister did." I raised my glass with pride and said, "Great, then she can pay your bills too." And then everything changed. I said it with a calm, controlled smile, the kind of smile you give someone who's finally made it clear they were never on your side. There was a stunned silence after I raised my glass, maybe 5 or 10 seconds, but it felt like time stretched long enough to see everyone's expressions shift. The laughter died, the clinking of forks against plates stopped, and my father, still holding a half-empty beer, blinked as if he wasn't sure what he'd just heard. But I knew what I'd said. For the first time in my life, every word carried real weight. The party was supposed to be a celebration, my college graduation, and not from just any university. I'd clawed my way through one of the best public universities in the region, paying for most of it myself. Scholarships, side jobs, late-night tutoring sessions, early morning shifts at the campus cafeteria. It wasn't pretty, but I made it. I did it, and nobody in my family had lifted a finger to help. But that didn't stop me from inviting them. I rented the patio of a local restaurant with the little I'd saved, bought trays of food, decorations, drinks, even paid for a musician, just a guy with a guitar and a voice that could make you feel something. I wanted that night to feel special, like a turning point, and maybe it was, just not in the way I expected. Everyone came, my mother, quiet but supportive in her own way, my aunt and uncle, who were always on that line between family and spectators, my little cousins running around with balloons tied to their wrists, and of course my father. He showed up an hour late, already half-drunk, wearing a wrinkled fishing shirt and that arrogance I knew all too well. My sister Lucia didn't come, she rarely did, but somehow she was still present, floating in every sentence my father uttered, especially the one that turned the whole night upside down. "You didn't deserve this success," he said, standing up to give some kind of speech, or maybe just to hear himself talk. "Your sister did." The words weren't slurred, weren't said with a laugh. They fell heavy with the weight of years behind them. In that moment, I realized something. I'd been waiting my whole life for this man to tell me he was proud of me, and he never would. So I raised my glass as if we were still celebrating and said, "Great, then she can pay your bills too." It wasn't loud, I didn't need it to be. People heard, people understood. Some smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. I set the glass down, looked at my father one last time, and walked away. No explanations, no goodbyes, no looking back. I didn't go straight home after the party. I didn't have the strength to sit in my quiet apartment and relive every second of what had just happened. Instead, I drove aimlessly, no destination, no plan, just streetlights and silence. Around midnight, I ended up at the Overlook on the edge of town, that place teenagers used to sneak off to, where the city looked smaller, manageable. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat with the windows down. The cold didn't bother me, it kept me present. I kept thinking about that sentence. "You didn't deserve this success. Your sister did." What success? The degree I'd clawed through 5 grueling years to earn. The job I landed after a brutal round of interviews. The debt I'd avoided by living off instant noodles and skipping nights out when everyone else was partying. What had Lucia done to deserve it more? That question had hovered over my life for as long as I could remember. Growing up, it was always Lucia who got the easy forgiveness, the second chances, the applause just for showing up. She dropped out of community college after one semester, and my father still called her the smart one. When I got my first job at 16 to help pay for my own school clothes, Lucia was on her third warning at the video game store and still got a pat on the back for working hard. But I never had concrete proof of the favoritism, not until my junior year of college. I came home one weekend and found a tuition bill on the kitchen counter, with Lucia's name on it, paid in full. That was the first time I knew, beyond any doubt, that things were exactly as lopsided as I'd always felt. I didn't say anything then. I didn't want to start a fight. I thought maybe they couldn't help me because money was tight, or they were doing their best, or they assumed I didn't need it. But now, standing in that patio hours earlier, hearing my father praise the daughter who wasn't even there while dismissing everything I'd sacrificed, the last of those excuses crumbled. That's when I started pulling at the thread, digging into old memories, remembering things I'd buried, seeing who they chose to save and who they expected to survive on their own. It was never about money, never about success. It was about belief. My parents, especially my father, never believed in me. I looked out at the dark city and whispered, "This is done just for me." I didn't mean the argument. I meant the pretending, the waiting, the effort. I was done reaching for a hand that was never going to reach back. The funny thing about growing up overlooked is you learn to disappear quietly, even when you're standing in the middle of your own life. But that night at the Overlook, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't want to disappear. I wanted out, not just out of the party, not just away from my father's voice. I wanted out of them, my family. For so long, I told myself that earning their approval was just a matter of time, that if I worked hard enough, got good grades, landed the right job, something would click. They'd see me, finally see me, but they never did, and it wasn't that they were cruel like cartoon villains that would have been easier to walk away from. It was more like being invisible unless they needed something. My father needed help with taxes. I was the responsible one. My mother needed someone to fix her laptop. Of course, I was the tech expert. Lucia crashed her car again. I was expected to drive her to job interviews she'd never take. They didn't hate me. That would have required effort. They just didn't care. That realization simmered for a few days after the party. I didn't respond to texts or voicemails. My aunt messaged me on Facebook saying my father wasn't himself that night, that he didn't mean it. My mother left a voicemail. Please don't let one moment ruin everything. But it wasn't one moment. It was all the moments, the little comments over the years, the way they told Lucia she was finding herself when she failed, but told me to grow up when I struggled. That time my father called me too intense because I wanted to talk about career goals, and later that same night proudly announced that Lucia had started a garage band, a band that never played a single gig. The resentment I'd buried for so long started surfacing in flashes, memories I didn't even know were still alive. Like when I broke my arm in high school and still got scolded for missing practice, while Lucia failed an entire semester and got a trip to Cancun to de-stress. Or when I got my college acceptance letter and all my father said was, "I hope you're not expecting a handout." I never did, and yet I gave my time, my money, my patience, my silence, but now I had nothing left to give. There was no dramatic confrontation, no yelling, no "you'll regret this" monologue. I just stopped. Stopped calling, stopped texting, stopped hopping. They wanted a version of me that didn't exist, the silent supporter, the steady brother, the shadow in the corner clapping for everyone else. I'd played that role for so long I'd almost forgotten I was allowed to leave the stage. The decision didn't come with some dramatic crescendo of music and clarity. It came on a Tuesday, a regular gray Tuesday, 2 days after the party. I woke up, made coffee, sat at the small kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment, and stared at the framed photo of my college graduation, the only picture I'd asked the waiter to take before I left the restaurant. In the background, you could see people laughing, plates still full, a balloon caught mid-drift. But I wasn't looking at the party. I was looking at myself. I didn't look proud or even relieved. I looked tired, like someone who'd carried a weight so long they didn't know they could put it down. That's when I picked up my phone, not to text, not to call, but to block. First my father, then my mother, then Lucia, then the family group chat that never included me in anything unless someone needed a ride or help filling out forms. One by one, I silenced them. I didn't write a goodbye message, didn't post anything vague or cryptic online. I just cut out the noise. Then I packed. I'd held onto that apartment out of habit, close enough to home in case they needed me, far enough to keep some boundaries. But it wasn't really mine. It was a waiting room, a halfway point between trying and giving up. Now I was done waiting. I sold most of my furniture on Facebook Marketplace, used the money to pay off the last of my student loans, and transferred the lease to a friend from work. In 2 weeks I was gone, new city, new apartment, new number, no fanfare. The only thing I took, besides the essentials, was the diploma. I finally framed it and hung it on the wall above my desk, not to brag, not as motivation, but as proof that I did it on my own, that it mattered, even if no one else ever said so. Even if my father had stood in front of a room full of people and tried to erase me, I was still here. I was still standing. And for the first time, I was standing alone, not because they'd pushed me out, but because I'd walked away on purpose. The first memory I have of knowing something was wrong was when I was 7. My father had promised to take Lucia and me fishing. I'd been counting down the days, checking the kitchen calendar every morning. The night before, I packed my little backpack with a sandwich, a water bottle, and a fish identification book I'd borrowed from the library. I woke up before dawn, too excited to sleep, but Lucia didn't want to go. She decided to stay home and watch cartoons. And my father, instead of taking just me, canceled the whole trip. No point in going if Lucia, not coming, he said, like I wasn't standing right there with my backpack already on. That day, I sat on the back porch for hours, pretending I didn't care. It was the first time I felt that hollow in my stomach, that sense of being second in my own life. At 10, I won a science fair at school. I'd built a small wind generator that could power a light bulb, worked on it for weeks, reading library books, borrowing tools from the neighbor. When I brought home the blue ribbon certificate, my mother said, "That's nice," and stuck it on the fridge. It stayed there for exactly 3 days until Lucia brought home a drawing of a unicorn. My certificate got moved to the junk drawer. The unicorn stayed on the fridge for months. By high school, I'd learned not to expect much. My grades were excellent, but no one checked my homework. I joined the debate team and won regional tournaments. My parents never attended a single one. Meanwhile, Lucia cycled through hobbies every 3 months: ballet, guitar, photography, and each new interest was celebrated like she discovered the cure for cancer. She got private lessons, expensive equipment, endless encouragement. I asked for used books and worked weekends at the grocery store, to buy my own graphing calculator. High school only deepened the divide. I distinctly remember the night I got my college acceptance letter. I'd applied to 5 universities and got into all of them. I chose the one with the best scholarship, though it didn't cover everything. When I showed the letter at dinner, my father nodded and said, "I hope you have a plan to pay for that." My mother added, "It's a lot of money, honey. Are you sure it's worth it?" That same night, Lucia announced she wanted to take a gap year after high school to find herself. My parents applauded her bravery. My father said, "That shows real maturity, knowing what you need." They gave her money for a road trip with her friends. Maybe the clearest example came during my sophomore year of college. I'd been working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load, sleeping 4 hours a night. My grades started slipping, not much, but enough to worry me. I called home, something I rarely did, and asked my father if he could help, just for that semester, just enough so I could cut back on work hours and focus on my studies. "Life's tough," he said. "You have to learn to handle your own problems. Nobody's going to bail you out in the real world." 2 weeks later, Lucia crashed the car my parents had bought her, not for the first time. She'd been driving after drinking at a party. No one was hurt, but the car was totaled. My parents paid for the repairs, the fine, and bought her a new phone because hers broke in the crash. "Everyone makes mistakes," my mother said. "The important thing is you're safe." By then I knew pointing out the unfairness was pointless. I'd just be labeled resentful, jealous, difficult. So I kept going, working harder, sleeping less, finding ways to stretch every dollar. I graduated with honors despite it all. The irony is I was always the responsible one. When my parents needed help with anything practical, taxes, house repairs, computer issues, they called me. When they needed someone to care for my sick grandmother, I was the one rearranging my schedule to be there. When they needed a loan, yes, they asked me for money while I was still paying off my student loans. I was the one who somehow found a way to help. And yet at every family gathering, every Christmas dinner, every birthday, it was Lucia who got the spotlight. Have you seen Lucia's Instagram photos? So creative. Lucia's thinking about starting an online store, how exciting. Lucia has a new boyfriend. He's a doctor, you know. Meanwhile, I was invisible unless someone needed something. After the graduation party, the messages started rolling in. My mother, "Your father was tired, he didn't mean it." My aunt, "Families fight, it's normal, don't be so sensitive." My father, surprisingly, didn't apologize. Instead, he texted, "I hope you're satisfied, ruining everyone's night with your drama." That was the message that finally crystallized everything for me. I hadn't created the drama. He was the one who'd stood up at my graduation party, the one I'd paid for, and declared I didn't deserve to be there. And somehow, I was the villain for responding. I read the messages one last time before blocking them all. There was one from Lucia. "Dad's really upset, you should call him." Not a word about how I felt, not a question about whether I was okay, just the expectation that, as always, I'd be the one to fix things, to swallow my pride, to keep the family peace at the cost of my own dignity. But this time I didn't. This time I let the silence speak for me. And in that silence, I could finally hear my own thoughts, my own desires, my own voice. It was no longer an echo of their expectations. It was just me. I was finally free of the shadow of being second best, the less loved, the one who always had to prove his worth. And it turned out, away from their constant judgment, I had far more worth than they'd ever let me believe. My new apartment was small but entirely mine, a studio on the 7th floor of a walk-up building in a city 3 hours from my family. The walls were thin, and I could hear my neighbor playing the saxophone on Sunday mornings, but there was something comforting in that sound. It was real, imperfect, present, like my new life. The first few months were strangely peaceful. I expected to feel guilt, or at least doubt, but what I felt was relief, so deep that sometimes I caught myself breathing more fully, like my lungs finally had room to expand. My routine became simple: work, exercise, cooking for myself, reading books I'd put off for years. I started taking photography classes at a local community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never let myself. Turns out, I had an eye for composition. My instructor encouraged me to submit some photos to a small local exhibit. I sold 2. The money wasn't much, but the feeling was priceless. Someone had seen something I'd created and valued it enough to take it home. Not because I was their son or their brother, or because they felt sorry for me, just because it was good. I met new people, people who had no preconceived notions about who I was or how I should behave. To them, I was just Miguel, the quiet guy from the design department who took good photos and made great coffee. I wasn't the responsible one, the serious one, the one who always figured it out. I was just me. 6 months after moving, I got a job offer at a bigger company with better pay and growth opportunities. I took it without hesitation. I didn't have to consult anyone, didn't have to consider how it would affect my family, didn't have to worry about being too far away in case someone needed a favor. I just made the decision that was best for me. That's when I realized how much I'd been limiting my own opportunities to stay available for people who were rarely available for me. Of course, it wasn't all easy. There were days when the silence on my phone was deafening, birthdays that passed without messages, Christmases I spent with friends instead of family. Sometimes, in random moments, waiting in line at the grocery store or waking up in the middle of the night, I'd wonder if I'd been too drastic, if I should have tried one more time to explain how I felt. But then I'd remember the look on my father's face when he said I didn't deserve my success, remember all the times I'd tried over the years to earn a place in my own family, and I knew I'd made the right choice. A year after the graduation party, I got an email from my mother. She'd found my work email on LinkedIn. It was short. "Your father's in the hospital. He had a heart attack. It's not serious, but I thought you should know." I read the message several times, expecting to feel urgency, panic, the need to rush to his side. But what I felt was a distant concern, the kind you'd feel for an acquaintance. I replied, asking for details, assuring her I hoped he'd recover soon. I didn't offer to visit, didn't ask for the room number, didn't rearrange my life to be there. My mother sent occasional updates. My father was recovering. Lucia had flown in from wherever she was living now to be with him. They were all together as a family. The unspoken message was clear. They were all together, except me. And for the first time, that was okay. It wasn't my responsibility to complete their family picture. 3 months later, I got another email, this time from my father. "Your mother gave me your email. I hope you're doing okay. Things have been different since you left." No apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd said or done, just a vague reference to things being different, as if my absence was just a change in the family weather, not the result of years of neglect and favoritism. I replied politely but firmly. I told him I was doing okay, better than ever, actually. I shared about my new job, my apartment, my photography. I didn't mention how hurt I'd been, didn't ask for explanations, didn't leave room for empty promises or superficial reconciliations. I ended the email with, "Glad to hear you're recovering. Take care." I didn't sign it with "love" or "your son," just my name. Weeks passed without a reply. I didn't expect one. I'd said what I needed to say, and for the first time I wasn't waiting for his approval or understanding. On my birthday that year, I didn't get calls from my family. Instead, my new friends threw a small surprise party at my apartment. We ate pizza, drank cheap beer, and played board games until the early hours. One of them had baked a cake, lopsided, a bit burnt on the edges, but made with genuine care. As I blew out the candles, I thought about how my whole life, I'd been chasing something I was never going to find in the people who were supposed to give it to me, and how walking away had finally made room for other people to step in, people who saw me clearly, who valued what I offered, who didn't constantly measure me against an impossible standard. That night, surrounded by friends I'd chosen and who'd chosen me, I realized I'd built something my family never gave me, a place where I belonged, just by being who I was. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself. It was better. 2 years after cutting ties with my family, I got a call from an unknown number. I don't usually answer those, but that day, for some reason, I did. "Miguel," it was my Aunt Carmen, my mother's younger sister. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but please don't hang up." I stayed silent, waiting. Carmen had always been the kindest in the family, well-meaning, though she'd never really stepped in when things got tough. "Your mother's very sick, Miguel, cancer. She's in treatment, but it's not responding like they hoped." I felt a knot in my throat. Despite everything, the years of feeling invisible, the silence of the last 2 years, she was my mother. "I'm so sorry to hear that," I said finally. "What kind of cancer?" "Pancreatic, they caught it late." The words hung between us. Pancreatic cancer, even I knew what that meant. "Why are you calling me, and not my father or Lucia?" Carmen sighed. "They don't know I'm calling you. Your mother asked for your number a few months ago, but she made me promise not to contact you unless things got really bad. And they're really bad now. The doctors say maybe 6 months. It could be less." I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process it. My mother was dying, and still, she hadn't called me herself, hadn't tried to make things right while she still had time. "What do you want me to do, Aunt Carmen?" "She wants to see you, Miguel. She won't say it out loud. She's too proud, but I see it in her eyes when she mentions your name. And she does, she mentions you." I closed my eyes, trying to picture my mother talking about me, thinking about me. It was hard to visualize. And my father, Lucia. "Your father's, he's dealing with it in his own way. Barely talks, spends all his time at the hospital or working. Lucia comes when she can, but you know how she is. She's in New York now with some new boyfriend, some new project. She flies in for a few days, then disappears for weeks." Typical, I thought, but didn't say. "When?" I asked finally. "When what? When should I go?" There was a pause, like Carmen hadn't expected me to agree so easily. This weekend, if you can. She's having good days and bad days. Better not to wait too long. We worked out the details. I'd stay in a hotel, not the family house. Carmen would pick me up at the train station. She gave me the hospital room number and visiting hours. When I hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out my apartment window. The life I'd built over the last 2 years felt solid, safe. I had friends, a job I enjoyed, even started dating someone, though it was too early to know if it'd work out. The idea of going back home, of diving back into all those old dynamics, churned my stomach. But it was my mother, and she was dying. The train ride was surreal. Every mile closer to my hometown seemed to pull me back into an older version of myself. I found myself hunching my shoulders, talking less to strangers, slipping into old habits I thought I'd left behind. Carmen was waiting at the station, just as she'd promised. She looked older than I remembered, new lines around her eyes and mouth. "You look good," she said, giving me a brief hug. "Healthy." "I am," I replied. "I'm good." In the car, she filled me in. My mother had been diagnosed 8 months ago. At first, everyone thought it was just stress, maybe an ulcer. By the time they figured out the truth, the cancer had already spread. "Does she know I'm coming?" I asked as we neared the hospital. Carmen shook her head. "I didn't want to give her false hope in case you changed your mind." The hospital smelled like all hospitals, disinfectant, illness, and bland food. I followed Carmen through endless hallways until we reached room 412. "Want me to come in with you?" she asked. I shook my head. "I think I need to do this alone." I took a deep breath and opened the door. My mother was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She was thinner than I remembered, her skin a yellowish tint that hadn't been there before. Her hair, always perfectly dyed and styled, was short and gray. She turned when she heard the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "Miguel," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Hi, Mom." I walked to the bed, unsure of what to do, how to act. Should I hug her, hold her hand, keep my distance? She solved the dilemma by reaching out her hand. I took it, surprised by how fragile it felt, like holding a bird. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. Carmen called. Of course she did. A small smile crossed her face, always the sentimental one in the family. We sat in silence for a moment, and then, to my surprise, my mother started crying, not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears running down her sunken cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said, "for everything, for not seeing you, for not being there, for letting your father." She stopped, unable to go on. I felt my own tears forming. For years, I'd imagined an apology like this, but in my fantasies, I always responded with cold dignity, maybe even turned it away. Now that it was actually happening, all I felt was a deep sadness. "I'm sorry too," I said finally. "I'm sorry it took this for us to really talk." We spent the next few hours talking, really talking, maybe for the first time. She told me about her own father, how he'd overlooked her in favor of her brothers, how she'd sworn she'd never do the same to her kids. "And then I did anyway," she said. "Not in the same way, but just as bad." I told her about my life now, my job, my friends, my photography. I showed her some pictures on my phone. She seemed genuinely interested, asking questions, wanting to see more. "You're so talented," she said. "You always were." When the nurse came to say visiting hours were over, I promised to come back the next day. "Will you see your father?" my mother asked as I got ready to leave. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that." She nodded, understanding. "I get it, but he's sorry too, in his own way." "His way was never enough for me," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I know, and that's our fault, not yours." I leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture I didn't remember ever doing before. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mom." That night in my hotel room, I called my girlfriend, Daniela. I told her about the visit, the apology, how strange it felt to be home but not really home. "Do you think she's sincere?" Daniela asked. "I think so," I said after a moment. "But I also think it's easy to be sincere when you're dying. It's easy to see your mistakes when you don't have to live with the consequences of fixing them." "And is that enough for you?" "I don't know," I admitted.